The ocean wind hit me the moment I stepped onto the lawn, carrying that specific, heavy mix of brine, expensive catering, and the metallic taste of things I thought I'd swallowed 10 years ago. I had told myself this weekend was a victory lap. I was the one who made it out, the one who traded this coastal college town for the sharp, vertical ambition of New York. I was supposed to be untouchable. Then the crowd shifted, a gap opening in the sea of black ties and sequins, and there she was, Loretta. She was wearing a deep green velvet blazer that caught the ambient light, looking devastatingly composed. My chest tightened, a physical blow. 10 years of distance hadn't dulled the ache. It had only sharpened it into a weapon that was currently pressed against my throat. The white reunion tent was a wash of noise, a wall of forced laughter, and the clinking of champagne flutes that felt aggressively cheerful. It was a stark contrast to the silence that had suddenly expanded inside my own head. I stood near the entrance, gripping the stem of my wine glass like it was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. In New York, my life is a grid. It is structural, engineered for efficiency, and insulated from this kind of emotional risk. I have a corner office with a view of the Hudson, a calendar that is managed to the minute, and a carefully curated circle of friends who know better than to ask about the past. I built that life, specifically, to ensure I would never again feel the way I felt standing on the edge of this carpet. My mind, traitorous and fast, didn't stay in the safety of my Manhattan apartment. It snapped back to the architecture of our ending. It went straight to Chicago, 10 years ago. The memory wasn't hazy, it was high definition and cruel. We were in that drafty apartment on the near north side, the one with the radiator that hissed like a cornered animal. I had the fellowship offer letter in my hand. New York, prestigious, the kind of career maker you don't say no to. But I was ready to say no. I was ready to burn the letter if it meant I could stay in the warmth of the life we were building. I remembered the look on Loretta's face. It wasn't angry. It was resigned, like she had already done the math and didn't like the sum. She had refused to let me turn it down. She told me to go. At the time, through the lens of my own insecurity, I read it as a rejection. I thought she was choosing her own ambition, her own architectural firm that was just taking off over the messy, tangled reality of us. I packed my bags with a furious efficiency, waiting for a protest that never came. Now, watching her across the room, that old resentment felt thin, worn through by the friction of years. She was talking to a man in a gray suit, her head tilted slightly to the side in a gesture that was terrifyingly familiar. She hadn't just aged, she had deepened. There were strands of silver threading through her dark curls now, catching the light like veins of quartz and rock. She held her drink with a casual, loose grip. Her posture relaxed but commanding. She looked like someone who had built things that lasted, while I felt like I was made of glass that was about to shatter. The physical reaction was immediate and humiliating. My heart rate spiked, a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and my throat closed up. It was a primal fight-or-flight response, the body recognizing a predator or a lover. And in Loretta's case, the distinction had always been blurry. I wanted to turn around, walk back to the parking lot, and drive until the reception faded from my rearview mirror. I wanted to protect the version of the story I had told myself for a decade, the one where I was the one who moved on to better things. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the gravity of her presence. She turned then, perhaps sensing the weight of my gaze, but before our eyes could lock, a hand clamped onto my shoulder. It was Mark, a mutual friend from the old days, his face flushed with wine and nostalgia. He was waving me over, pulling me into the orbit I had been trying to escape. I took a breath that tasted like salt and panic, and I let myself be pulled. The collision was inevitable. The architecture of my departure had collapsed, and I was standing in the wreckage, waiting for her to see me. Mark's hand was heavy on my shoulder, a friendly anchor dragging me into deep water. He was chattering about the old days, about dorm rooms and late-night study sessions, oblivious to the fact that he was pulling me directly into the gravitational field of the one person I had spent a decade orbiting away from. The circle of friends opened up to admit us, a protective ring of familiar faces holding cocktails and half-eaten appetizers. They acted as a buffer, a layer of social insulation. But the moment I stepped into the gap, the air changed. It thinned out, becoming sharp and electrically charged, the way the atmosphere shifts right before a summer storm breaks over the city. Loretta didn't flinch. She didn't step back, and she didn't lean in. She simply turned her gaze toward me, dark eyes cool and assessing, as if she were inspecting a structural flaw in a building she had designed years ago. "Hello," she said. Her voice was exactly the same, low, deliberate, with a cadence that always made you lean in to catch the end of the sentence. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a welcome. It was just an acknowledgement of presence, a flat fact dropped into the center of the conversation. "Loretta," I managed to say. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Too high, too brittle. I took a sip of wine to hide the way my throat had constricted. "You look, well, busy," she corrected, a faint, polite smile touching the corner of her mouth but not reaching her eyes. She turned back to the group, seamlessly integrating me into the narrative she had been spinning. She was talking about her firm in Chicago, about a restoration project in the Gold Coast that involved stripping a century-old brownstone down to its studs to save the foundation. She spoke with a practiced, professional detachment, using words like integrity and preservation. I stood there, gripping my glass, feeling the subtext of her words land like physical blows. I knew what she was doing. She was drawing a line in the sand between us. She was the one who stayed, the one who built things that lasted, the one who did the hard, unglamorous work of maintenance. I was the one who left, the one who chased the shiny, vertical ascent of New York. When Mark asked me about my work, I launched into my standard pitch. Market volatility, the speed of the trade, the adrenaline of the closing bell. Loretta watched me while I spoke. She didn't interrupt, but her silence felt heavy, weighted with judgment. "It sounds fast," she said when I finished, her eyes locking onto mine. "Efficient, but I suppose that's what you always wanted, to move on to better things without looking back." The air between us seemed to vibrate. The accusation was wrapped in velvet, but it was there. And then the wind shifted and the scent hit me. It wasn't the ocean air or the catering trays, it was her, sandalwood, and that specific, clean ozone smell of rain. It was the scent of our old apartment on Sunday mornings, the smell of her skin when she would pull me back into bed, the smell of the sheets I had cried into the night I left. It cut through the ambient noise of the party, triggering a visceral sensory memory so strong my knees actually felt weak. I fought to keep my face neutral, to maintain the mask of the successful New Yorker who was above nostalgia, but inside I was unraveling. My anger, the righteous indignation I had nursed since Chicago, was dissolving into something much more dangerous. It was morphing into a desperate, clawing need to be acknowledged, to break through that cool exterior and make her feel the same jagged edge that was cutting me. Every glance she threw my way felt like a touch. Not a gentle one, but a deliberate, heavy pressure, like a hand resting on the small of my back, guiding me, claiming me. The tension coiled tight in my chest, a physical ache. Then a bell chimed over the speakers. The keynote speech. The group began to disperse, drifting toward the auditorium like a tide going out. Mark patted my arm and moved away, taking the buffer with him. The noise of the crowd receded, and suddenly the insulation was gone. It was just the two of us standing in the grass, the silence stretching between us, heavy and undeniable. The auditorium was a cavern of velvet and shadow. We flowed into it with the rest of the alumni, a river of dark suits and evening gowns, but somehow, in the shuffle, the universe played its cruelest joke. Maybe it was gravity again? We ended up in the middle row, shoulder to shoulder. The seats were old, theater-style, designed for a time when personal space was a suggestion rather than a right. The lights dimmed, plunging the room into a heavy, expectant darkness. The projector whirred to life, throwing a beam of dust-mote-filled light toward the screen. I didn't watch it. I couldn't. All my senses were recalibrated, narrowed down to the 3 inches of space between my left arm and her right one. The armrest was a demilitarized zone. Neither of us claimed it, but the air above it was thick, radiating a heat that felt impossible for an air-conditioned room. I sat there, rigid, staring straight ahead at a grainy photo of the library from 1990, but seeing only the ghost of our kitchen table. That was where the conversation had happened. The separate dreams speech. It played on a loop in my head, louder than the dean's voice. I remembered the way she had framed it. Logical, architectural, sound. She had said that we were 2 expanding cities, and if we tried to occupy the same map, we'd only choke each other's skylines. She had her firm to build in Chicago. I had the fellowship in New York. She made it sound like a zoning issue, like a logistical incompatibility rather than a heartbreak. I had left believing that my dream was the problem, that my ambition was the wedge. I thought she loved her blueprints more than she loved the way I made coffee, or the way we fit together on a rainy Sunday. Sitting there in the dark, 10 years later, the bitterness of that belief tasted like copper in my mouth. I had spent a decade proving her right, building my skyline, making sure I was visible from space, just to show her that I was worth the distance. But sitting this close to her, feeling the static charge of her arm almost brushing mine, the victory felt hollow. It felt like I had built a monument in a desert where no one lived. I risked a glance, just a shift of the eyes. In the flickering blue light of the screen, Loretta's profile was etched in sharp relief. She wasn't watching the presentation either. Her gaze was fixed on a point somewhere near the exit sign, unseeing. Her jaw was set tight, a hard line of tension that betrayed the cool, professional mask she'd worn outside. She looked like she was holding her breath. She looked like she was in pain. Then I saw it. Her hand was resting on her thigh, the dark fabric of her trousers stark against her hand. Her index finger twitched. It lifted, just a fraction of an inch, and moved toward me. It was an abortive gesture, a subconscious reach across the gap. It was the body remembering what the mind had forbidden. For a second, I thought she was going to bridge the distance to cover my hand with hers and shatter the long estrangement with a single touch. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, waiting, wanting. But she caught herself. I saw the moment her control snapped back into place. Her fingers curled into a fist, tight and white-knuckled, and she pulled her arm in closer to her body, retreating into her own space. The rejection, even a silent, unconscious one, stung worse than the words she had said 10 years ago. It was proof that the wall between us wasn't just geography anymore. It was fortified concrete. The applause broke the moment like a thunderclap. The lights surged back on, too bright, too sudden, exposing us. We stood up in unison, the movement synchronized by muscle memory we hadn't used in years. The crowd surged toward the exits, pushing us together. For a split second, her hip bumped mine. The contact was electric, a jolt that went straight to the spine. She pulled away instantly, murmuring a polite apology that sounded more like a curse. We were being funneled out, pushed toward the cool night air, but the heat of that near miss in the dark was still burning on my skin. The pretense was cracking. We couldn't keep doing this. We couldn't keep pretending we were just two alumni passing in the night. The proximity was crushing us both, and sooner or later, something was going to break. The air in the hallway felt recycled, heavy with the exhaled breath of 300 people pretending to be impressed by each other's lives. I couldn't take another minute of it. I pushed through the heavy oak doors at the back of the building, stumbling out into the night like a diver surfacing for air. The courtyard was a pocket of shadows and stone, perched precariously on the edge of the campus where the manicured lawns gave way to the jagged drop of the cliffs. Here the polite hum of the reunion was swallowed by the roar of the ocean below. The wind was picking up, tearing off the water in cold, salty gusts that stung my cheeks and stripped away the lingering warmth of the auditorium. I walked to the stone balustrade, gripping the rough masonry until the grit dug into my palms. I needed the pain to ground me. I needed the cold to freeze out the memory of her arm almost touching mine in the dark. I stared out at the black void of the Atlantic, trying to reassemble the armor that Loretta had managed to crack just by sitting next to me. I didn't hear the door open, but I felt the shift in the atmosphere. The air behind me suddenly felt denser, charged with a specific, familiar static. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I felt her presence like a drop in barometric pressure, a warning that the storm I had been outrunning for a decade had finally made landfall. "You always did run when the room got too small," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the wind with terrifying clarity. I turned slowly, steeling myself. Loretta was standing 10 feet away, the velvet of her blazer absorbing the moonlight. She looked untethered, the wind whipping strands of dark hair across her face, ruining the perfect composure she had maintained inside. It made her look wilder, more dangerous. "I'm not running," I lied, my voice tight. "I just needed air that didn't smell like desperation and cheap perfume." "Is that what you think this is?" She stepped closer, her heels clicking softly on the flagstones. She didn't stop until she was close enough that I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes were searching mine for a weakness. "I think you're projecting. You looked like you were suffocating in there." "I'm fine, Loretta. I'm better than fine." "Are you?" The question was soft, but it landed like an accusation. She tilted her head, studying me with that unnerving, unflinching focus. "Are you happy in New York?" The question felt like a trap. It felt like she was looking for a crack in the foundation so she could bring the whole structure down. My defense mechanism kicked in instantly, a reflex honed in boardrooms and negotiations. I straightened my spine, lifting my chin. "I'm a partner at the firm, Loretta. I have a loft in Tribeca that was featured in Architectural Digest. I spend my weekends in the Hamptons. I have everything I said I was going to get when I left." I recited the list like an incantation, using my resume as a shield. "I built a life that people kill for. I have autonomy. I have success. I have the city." Loretta laughed, a dry, humorless sound that was snatched away by the wind. "I didn't ask for your tax bracket. I asked if you were happy." "I am successful," I snapped, the anger flaring hot and sudden in my chest. "I made the right choice. Look at where I am." "You're standing alone in the dark at a reunion you didn't want to come to," she countered, her voice dropping an octave, becoming intimate and harsh all at once. "You're confusing a return on investment with a life, darling. Just because the choice was profitable doesn't mean it was right. And you're the expert on right choices? I stepped toward her, invading her space, fueled by a decade of resentment. You're the one who pushed me out. You're the one who said we couldn't exist on the same map. Don't stand there and lecture me about happiness when you were the one who decided my ambition was too big for your world. I never said your ambition was too big, she shot back, the cool mask finally slipping. I said the timing was impossible. It's the same thing. It isn't, and you know it. We were standing inches apart now, the wind swirling around us, locking us in a private vortex of unresolved history. I could hear her breathing, sharp and shallow, over the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs. The anger was there, jagged and real, but beneath it, the old current was waking up, the magnetic pull that had always made fighting with her feel dangerously like foreplay. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, traitorous rhythm. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to pull her into me and breathe her in until the last 10 years disappeared. The line between fury and desire was so thin, it was transparent. I opened my mouth to argue, to hurt her the way she had hurt me, but the sky opened up first. A sudden, icy drop hit my cheek, then another. The wind howled and the rain came down in a deluge, soaking us instantly. It wasn't a gentle shower. It was a cold, violent wash that forced the world to reset. We can't stay here, Loretta shouted over the wind, grabbing my arm. Her touch was electric, even through the wet fabric of my sleeve. The old science building is open. Come on. I didn't pull away. I let her pull me toward the shelter, running blindly through the dark. The argument suspended, but the tension screaming louder than the storm. The heavy door slammed shut behind us, severing the connection to the storm outside. The silence that followed was sudden and absolute, amplified by the cavernous acoustics of the empty lecture hall. We were standing in the back of the room, dripping wet, our breathing ragged and loud in the stillness. The air here was stale, smelling of chalk dust and old floor wax, a dry, academic scent that clashed violently with the ozone and rain clinging to our clothes. Outside, the storm threw itself against the high windows, a rhythmic, muffled thudding that felt like a heartbeat gone wrong. I wiped the water from my eyes, my hand shaking. The adrenaline from the courtyard hadn't faded. It had curdled into something sharper. Being in this enclosed space with her, stripped of the social armor of the reunion, felt dangerous. There was nowhere to look but at her. Loretta stood a few feet away, her wet hair plastered to her neck, the velvet blazer soaked through and dark as ink. She looked exhausted, the water dripping from her chin tracing the lines of a weariness she had been hiding all night. You're right, I said, my voice echoing in the gloom. I am angry. I've been angry for a decade because you made it so easy for yourself. You cut me loose so you could focus on your firm without the distraction of a partner who needed things from you. Is that the story you've been telling yourself? Loretta asked. She didn't look at me. She was staring at the rows of empty wooden seats descending into the dark, her profile stark and pale. That I chose blueprints over you? That I was just too ambitious to love you? You didn't fight for me, Loretta. You practically packed my bags. You told me our lives were incompatible. You chose your career over us. You pushed me away. She turned to me then, and the look on her face stopped the breath in my throat. The cool, architectural composure was gone. In its place was a raw, jagged vulnerability that I had never seen before, not even when we were together. Her eyes were bright with tears that had nothing to do with the rain. I didn't choose my career, she said, her voice cracking on the last word. I chose yours. What are you talking about? My father, she whispered. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and confusing. He had the stroke 3 days before your fellowship letter arrived. You didn't know. I made sure you didn't know. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Your dad? But you said he was fine. You said he was visiting your aunt in Florida. He was in the ICU at Northwestern, she corrected, the words tumbling out now, fast and desperate. He lost his speech. He lost the use of his right side. The doctors told us he would need 24-hour care for the rest of his life. I was the only family he had left in the city. I stared at her, my mind trying to rearrange 10 years of history in a single second. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you, she said, taking a step toward me, her eyes pleading for understanding. I knew exactly what you would do. You're a fixer. You have a savior complex a mile wide. If I had told you, you would have turned down New York. You would have stayed in that drafty apartment and helped me navigate insurance claims and feeding tubes. You would have sacrificed your fellowship to hold my hand. I would have wanted to, I said, the fight draining out of me, leaving me hollow. And 5 years later, you would have hated me for it, Loretta said firmly. You would have woken up one day, Realized you were 30 years old and changing sheets in a sick room instead of trading on Wall Street. And you would have resented me. I couldn't let you do that. I couldn't let you burn your future to keep me warm. So you lied, I breathed. You let me believe you didn't love me enough to stay. I broke your heart to save your life, she said. It was the only way to make you go. I had to be the villain because if I had been the victim, you never would have left. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The anger that had fueled me, that had driven me to succeed just to spite her, dissolved instantly. It left behind a terrifying clarity. All the nights I had spent cursing her name, she had been sitting by a hospital bed, alone. She hadn't rejected me. She had loved me so much she had amputated her own heart to set me free. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the toll the decade had taken. The silver in her hair wasn't just age, it was stress. The tension in her jaw wasn't arrogance, it was endurance. She was wet, shivering, and standing in the dark, waiting for me to judge her for saving me. The distance between us, the 10 years and the 1,000 miles, suddenly felt relevant. There was only the sound of the rain, the echo of her confession, and the devastating realization that I had left the only person who had ever truly known me. The silence that followed her admission wasn't empty. It was heavy, vibrating with the sudden removal of the wall I'd spent a decade reinforcing. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the woman who had been a villain in my narrative for 10 years dissolved. In her place stood the person who had loved me enough to let me go, shivering in a damp blazer, waiting for me to decide if the truth was enough to bridge the gap. It was. It had to be. I stepped into her space. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a gravitational correction. My hand moved before my mind caught up, reaching out to break the static field that had kept us apart all night. I touched her sleeve first, the velvet sodden and cold under my fingertips, a tentative inquiry. Loretta didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She stayed rooted to the spot, her breath hitching in a way that sounded loud in the quiet hall. Emboldened, I slid my hand up her arm, feeling the heat of her skin radiating through the wet fabric until my fingers found the curve of her neck. Her skin was damp, cool from the rain, but beneath it, the pulse was hammering, frantic, against my palm. The contact was an electric shock, a sudden, violent closing of a circuit that had been left open for too long. The air in the room seemed to thicken, coiling around us, heavy with our shared heat and the undeniable, sultry charge of proximity. "Loretta," I whispered. The name felt different in my mouth now, no longer an accusation, but a prayer. She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering shut, her composure finally crumbling completely. "I didn't know if you'd ever want to look at me again," she murmured, her voice rough. "I thought you'd hate me for the lie." "I could never hate you," I said, and the truth of it terrified me. "I tried for 10 years, but it never stuck." I used my thumb to wipe a raindrop from her cheekbone, the friction of skin on skin sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. It wasn't just relief, it was a homecoming. It was the visceral realization that every accomplishment in New York, every award, had been hollow because she wasn't there to witness it. I had been building a castle, and she was the only foundation that mattered. She opened her eyes, dark and unfathomable in the gloom, and the raw hunger I saw there mirrored my own. We didn't kiss. Not yet. That felt too simple, too easy. Instead, we did something more intimate. I stepped in until there was no air left between us, and she let out a shuddering breath, her hands coming up to grip the lapels of my jacket as if to anchor herself. We rested our foreheads together, the wet strands of her hair brushing against my face, cold and tangled. We stood there in the dark, breathing the same air, syncing our rhythms. In this proximity, the years compressed. The decade of separate lives evaporated. There was only the heat of her body, the smell of sandalwood and ozone, and the terrifying, beautiful weight of her against me. It was a communication deeper than language. My body remembered hers, the height of her shoulders, the way she fit against me, the specific cadence of her breathing. It was muscle memory waking up after a long coma. "I missed you," she whispered, the words vibrating against my skin. "Every day. It was loud without you." "It was quiet without you," I replied, my voice trembling. "Too quiet." She made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and pulled me into a crushingly tight embrace. Her arms wound around my waist, pulling me in until I could feel the beat of her heart against my own chest. I buried my face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her, feeling the solid, undeniable reality of her existence. This wasn't a greeting, it was a desperate attempt to hold the pieces of ourselves together. We were wet, cold, and standing in a drafty lecture hall, but I had never felt warmer. The rain outside began to slow, the drumming on the windows fading to a soft rhythm, but neither of us moved. We stayed there, wrapped in the dark and each other, unwilling to step back into the light just yet. We didn't go back to the tent. The idea of returning to the champagne toasts and the hollow inquiries about our 5-year plans felt impossible now, like trying to put on a costume that had been shredded. We walked to the parking lot in a silence that felt sacred, the wet asphalt shining under the street lamps like a runway. Loretta's car was a sleek, dark sedan, Italian, understated but powerful, exactly the kind of machine she would appreciate. When the doors clicked shut, sealing us inside, the sudden quiet was profound. She turned the key and the dashboard lit up, casting a soft, amber glow across her face, highlighting the damp curve of her cheek and the intense focus in her eyes. She didn't ask where I wanted to go. She just drove, guiding the car away from the campus and the cliffs, heading inland toward the small, sleepy town that anchored the university. The heater hummed to life, blowing warm air over our wet clothes, and the scent of drying wool and rain filled the small cabin. It was a sultry quiet, heavy with the things we hadn't said yet. But for the first time since I left, the stillness wasn't a barrier. It was a container, holding us together. I watched her hands on the wheel, confident, capable, the fingers long and unadorned. I remembered how those hands felt, and the memory wasn't nostalgic anymore. It was a promise. We ended up at a diner on the edge of town, a place with a flickering neon sign that buzzed with an audible electric hum and windows that were fogged up against the night. It was the kind of place where time stalled, where it could be 2 a.m. or 10 p.m., and the coffee would taste exactly the same. We slid into a booth in the back, the red vinyl squeaking beneath us. It was intimate, the table narrow enough that our knees brushed every time we shifted. The first time it happened, a jolt of electricity shot up my leg, sharp and immediate. I didn't pull away, neither did she. We sat there, pressing our legs together under the table, a secret point of contact that grounded me while the waitress poured 2 mugs of black coffee. "We have a problem," I said, breaking the silence. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic mug, kneading the heat. "The geography hasn't changed, Loretta. I'm still in New York. You're still in Chicago. We have leases. We have firms. We have lives that are heavy and hard to move." Loretta looked at me over the rim of her cup. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. "We're not 22 anymore," she said softly. "We're not broke students trying to figure out how to pay for a U-Haul. We have resources now. We have agency. It's not just the logistics," I admitted, the fear finally bubbling up, raw and honest. "I'm scared that we're falling in love with ghosts. You remember the girl who cried over poetry, and I remember the girl who wanted to save the world with blueprints. But we're not those people now. I'm cynical. I'm hardened. You're guarded. What if the people we are now don't fit?" It was the question that had been haunting me since I saw her in the ballroom, the fear that this chemistry was just an echo, a resonance from a structure that had already crumbled. Loretta didn't answer immediately. She set her mug down with a deliberate click. Then she reached across the scarred laminate table and took my hand. Her fingers laced through mine, warm and solid, her thumb finding the ridge of my knuckles and tracing it with a slow, deliberate pressure. It wasn't a tentative touch, it was a claim. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice dropping to that low register that vibrated in my chest. "I'm not looking at a ghost. I'm looking at a woman who built a life out of sheer will. I'm looking at someone who learned to survive without me, and I find that incredibly sexy. I don't want the 22-year-old. I want you, the version of you that knows how to fight." "And the distance?" I whispered, my thumb brushing against her wrist, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of her pulse. "We're architects of our own lives now," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "We build a bridge, we commute, we figure it out, but we don't let go. Not again." The diner faded. The neon buzz, the clatter of silverware, the smell of grease. It all receded until there was only the pressure of her hand in mine and the heat of her leg against mine under the table. It was a vow, spoken without ceremony, but binding nonetheless. We finished our coffee in a silence that felt like peace, then stood up together, my hand still in hers, and walked out toward the pier where the fog was rolling in to meet us. The dawn didn't break so much as it bled into existence, a slow, gray diffusion of light that softened the jagged edges of the coastline. We were walking along the pier, the wooden planks damp beneath our boots, the sound of the ocean, a rhythmic, persistent hush against the pilings below. The fog was rolling in off the Atlantic, thick and cool, narrowing the world down until it felt like we were the only 2 people left in it. It was a stark, beautiful isolation, the kind that forces you to look at what's right in front of you because everything else has disappeared into the mist. I looked at Loretta. In the unforgiving light of morning, stripped of the gala's glamour and the adrenaline of the storm, she was even more devastating. Her hair was windblown, tangled from the night and the humidity, and she had wrapped her velvet blazer tightly around herself against the chill. She looked real. For 10 years, she had been a phantom, a polished memory I kept under glass. Now, seeing the faint shadows of exhaustion under her eyes and the way she bit her lip when she was thinking, the ghost was gone. In its place was a woman of flesh and blood, a woman who had spent a decade caring for a dying father while building an empire, a woman who had loved me enough to let me go. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 10 years, she was the reason I left town. The pain of our ending, the belief that I wasn't enough to make her stay, that was the fuel that had propelled me to New York. It was the reason I worked 80-hour weeks, the reason I chased promotions like they were oxygen. I had been running away from this exact spot, from the feeling of being small in her shadow. But walking beside her now, our shoulders brushing with every step, I realized the narrative had inverted. She was the reason I left, yes, but she was now the only reason I wanted to be anywhere. The solitary success that had sustained me felt cold compared to the living warmth radiating from her arm next to mine. But the light also brought the sharp edges of reality back into focus. "I have a flight at 6, I said, the words heavy, dropping between us like stones. "And a board meeting on Tuesday. My life is a grid in Manhattan, Loretta. Yours is a restoration project in Chicago. We aren't just dealing with history anymore. We're dealing with geography." Loretta stopped walking. She turned to the railing, looking out at the gray water churning below. She didn't look defeated. She looked like she was calculating a load-bearing wall. "You're thinking like a rookie," she said, her voice calm, cutting through my rising panic. "You're thinking in binary. Stay or go. All or nothing. That's how 20-year-olds think because they don't have any leverage." "And what do we have her?" I asked, moving to stand beside her, close enough to see the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. "We have agency," she said, turning to face me. The wind caught a strand of her hair, blowing it across her face, and she brushed it away with an impatient, elegant gesture. "I run my own firm. You're a partner. We aren't beholden to anyone's schedule but our own. We have money. We have miles. We have the ability to bend the logistics to fit us, instead of breaking ourselves to fit the logistics." She stepped closer, invading my personal space in that deliberate, sultry way that made my breath hitch. Her hand came up to rest on the lapel of my jacket, grounding me. "I'm not asking you to sacrifice New York," she said, her eyes searching mine, intense and unflinching. "I know how hard you worked for that skyline. I would never ask you to tear it down. I'm asking for a partnership. I'm asking you to build a bridge with me. We do weekends. We do long summers. We meet in cities we've never been to just because we can. We make the distance part of the architecture, not the demolition." The intimacy of her understanding floored me. 10 years ago, the choice had been a weapon. One of us had to bleed for the other to survive. Now she was offering a different kind of contract. She wasn't asking for my surrender. She was asking for my effort. She was acknowledging that my success was part of who I was, not an obstacle to who we could be. I looked out at the ocean, feeling the armor I had worn for a decade finally clatter to the ground. The successful professional who didn't need anyone was gone. I was just a woman standing on a pier with the love of her life, realizing that the work wasn't the victory. This was. Loretta turned fully toward me, the salt air heavy around us. She didn't smile, but her gaze was open, vulnerable, waiting. The question hung in the space between our mouths, unspoken but deafening. "So," she whispered, her thumb brushing the pulse point at my throat. "What now?" The question hung in the salt air, vibrating between us. What now? Wasn't just about logistics. It was a challenge. It was Loretta asking if I was brave enough to rewrite the ending we had both accepted as final. I looked at the horizon, where the gray Atlantic met the sky, and then I looked at her. She was waiting, not with desperation, but with the quiet, terrifying confidence of someone who knows exactly what she's worth. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was stark and bright against the morning fog, a beacon of the life I had left on pause. I opened the airline app. Flight 492, back to LaGuardia. Seat 4A, that digital ticket represented safety. It was the return to order, to the carefully curated existence where no one could hurt me, because I didn't let anyone close enough to try. But standing here, with the damp wood of the pier beneath my boots and the warmth of Loretta's body inches from mine, safety felt suffocating. I didn't hesitate. I didn't let the fixer in me run a risk analysis or calculate the fallout. I tapped cancel. The confirmation prompt popped up, a final chance to retreat. I pressed yes. The boarding pass dissolved into pixels, and with it, the escape route I had kept in my back pocket for a decade. The relief was instantaneous, a physical unspooling of tension in my gut that I hadn't realized was chronic. I held the phone up for her to see. "I'm not running this time," I said. My voice was steady, grounded in the roar of the ocean below us. "The board meeting can wait. The city isn't going anywhere. But us. I'm not leaving this on the pier." Loretta stared at the screen, then up at me. Her smile started slow, a small, private quirk of the lips that I remembered from 1,000 mornings in Chicago, before blooming into something genuine and devastating. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It was a relieved one. It was the look of someone who had been holding up a ceiling for 10 years and finally had someone to help carry the weight. "You're going to miss your reservation at the Modern," she teased, though her voice was thick with emotion. "I'd rather eat diner eggs with you," I countered. And I meant it. That was the terrifying part. I meant it. We stood there for a long moment, the fog curling around our ankles, the world narrowed down to the heat of our bodies. I realized then that the legacy I had been so obsessed with building, the reputation, the assets, the name on the door, was just scaffolding. It was necessary structure, sure, but it wasn't the home. The home was this. It was the courage to stand in the cold and admit that I needed her more than I needed to be right. The reason I left town 10 years ago was fear. Fear that I wasn't enough. Fear that I would be consumed by a love that was bigger than my ambition. But the reason I was staying was love. Not the naive, desperate love of a 22-year-old, but the deliberate, chosen love of a woman who knows exactly what she's risking and does it anyway. "Come on," Loretta said softly, lacing her fingers through mine, her grip solid and sure. "Let's go. I have a guest room that seems to have a vacancy." "I think I'm looking for something more permanent than a guest room," I murmured, leaning in to brush my lips against her temple. "We can negotiate the lease terms over breakfast," she whispered back. We walked back toward the car, hand in hand, leaving the ghosts of our past on the edge of the cliffs where they belonged. We weren't looking back at the college, at the mistakes, or the lost time. We were walking toward the car, toward the road, toward a map we were going to draw together. I sat in the passenger seat of Loretta's car, watching the coastline blur into a smear of gray and green, feeling a profound sense of arrival. We needed those 10 years of silence. We needed to become the people who could survive each other, who could build a bridge instead of a wall. The reunion wasn't about the past, it was the start of the future. If you believe true connection waits for you to be ready, subscribe to follow more stories of love found and reclaimed.